Hey, this is Jamey from Stillmeyer Games, and today I'm doing a video that I'm pretty excited about, and this is my top 12 favorite mechanisms in games. If you look at Board Game Geek, there are like hundreds of different game mechanisms, from micro mechanisms, very specific mechanisms, to bigger concepts. And I've been kind of making an ongoing list for a while now about my favorite mechanisms. And a lot of these have become videos. You'll recognize a lot of, in fact, if you choose any of these topics, you could search on my channel for this topic and probably find a top 10 list or top 5 list for games in these categories. But I thought I'd actually rank these mechanisms from my favorite ones. So these are all my favorites, but I'll rank them from 12 to 1 in terms of which mechanisms I get the most excited about when I hear a game has X in it, or X plus Y plus Z, what I get the most excited about. And I'll name a few examples of games in each of these categories that I love, and pick my favorite game from that category. And I'm doing something a little bit different there in that I have a few games on my list here that I'm looking at on my screen that I will consider for each category, that I consider some among my favorites, but I haven't chosen my favorite yet. I'll choose that live as I'm filming this. So my number 12 favorite mechanism, and again, these are among all the different mechanisms. So I've picked my 12 favorite, and this is a favorite mechanism, but lower down on the list compared to some of the other ones, and that is simultaneous actions. So when players are taking simultaneous actions in games. Some examples of some of my favorite games in this category are Space Base, Quacks of Quedlinburg, neither of which I have. I do own, let's see, I'm going to have to, I have a bunch of games next to me here that I'm going to have to shuffle around. Libertalia is on this list. So in Libertalia, you are simultaneously choosing which character you're going to play as the other players. In Quacks, you are simultaneously drawing from your bag as the other players. In Space Base, it's not entirely simultaneous actions, but you are involved in every player's turn. Maybe that shouldn't even be in this category. But I do love Space Base anyway. And Orleans, also another game where you are drawing from your bag and placing those workers simultaneously as other players. And I love this mechanism because it leads to very little downtime, because you are doing something pretty much at the same pace as the other players and at the same time as the other players. The only downside is that it does require a little extra structure to the game. In some ways, it interrupts the flow of the game because you have to have a special phase in the game where you are all doing something simultaneously, and then you take a break from that phase and do the next phase. And so it requires this extra additional structure. But that said, I think when it's done well, like in these games, the simultaneous nature of it makes the game so much smoother than if you were waiting for each player to take a turn. Because it's the one I own, I'm going to choose Libertalia as my favorite in this category. I really do love Libertalia, and I love that choice is simultaneous. You're simultaneously choosing a character, and you're really actively thinking about what other players might choose and what's best for you at that moment. So Libertalia for my pick for simultaneous action games. My I'm doing a top 12, not top 10. My number 11 favorite category are closed or interdependent economies in games. The way to think about this is if you are acquiring something in the game or paying something in the game, you are doing that exchange with other players instead of the game itself. An example of this, and one of my favorites, is Isle of Skye. In Isle of Skye, you are buying tiles from other players, and at times you are also buying tiles that you put out, and the money goes to the bank. But it is an interdependent economy where oftentimes the money that you're receiving is coming from other players, and the tiles that you're buying, you're buying them from other players as well. I really, really love this because it leads to, like, you're together you are building and interacting in this economic space. Not that there's anything wrong with paying the game for resources and tiles and things like that and cards, but it adds an extra level of fun player interaction when you're doing that with the other players. The other example I put on this list is poker. In poker, you are exchanging money. You're winning hands from other players and winning and losing money with the other players. But I'm going to pick Isle of Skye as my top pick in this category for closed and interdependent economies. My number 10 favorite game mechanism is positive player interaction. this is not as specific of a mechanism as these other mechanisms, but I love in games when there's something intentional in the game built around the idea where something I do can be good for other players, or when I am interacting with other players in such a way that that we all end up feeling good. Maybe I feel better than the other players, but we all end up feeling a little good from that experience. Too often, I think when players think, oh, there's no player interaction in this game, they are actually saying there's no conflict in this game. And I think that's really unfortunate because there are lots of interesting ways to pay attention to other players and to even help other players, even in competitive games. Some examples of positive player interaction are in Downforce. Where's my Downforce? Downforce, which features both kind of positive and negative player interaction. You are playing cards in Downforce that move your car forward, but also on that card, there might be other colors on that card as well, and all of those cars move as well. So even when it's not your turn, going back to kind of the simultaneous actions, even when it's not your turn, good things are happening. Your car is probably moving forward, and thanks to the cards that other players are playing. And whenever you play a card, you're kind of gauging like, okay, which player do I want to help at this moment? Which player might get stuck a little bit? So it's positive, but you're also kind of timing it so other players don't advance too far based on the card that you play. But it's still largely a positive interaction in Downforce. And Concordia, I think Concordia has some great positive player interaction in that whenever you generate resources in Concordia, you're using your turn to do that and you're getting a benefit from it, but you are helping all players who have settlements or whatever the presence is in that region because they're all generating those resources. So I really like that in Concordia as well, but I'm going to take Downforce as my pick for favorite positive player interaction. And I try to do this in a lot of my games as well. Sometimes it just happens organically. It happened during the playtesting for Euphoria, where I found that it's a lot more fun to build the markets together in Euphoria than build them alone. So it ends up having this very positive feel in the game when you do that with other players. So positive player interaction, I love positive player interaction, is my number 10 favorite mechanism. My number 9 favorite mechanism is cooperation itself. So fully cooperative games where you are cooperating with other players. I do really love this mechanism in games, and it's probably the broadest of all these mechanisms because it's an entire category of games, cooperative games. A few of my favorites are time stories. Just One. I don't own Time Stories right now, but Just One. Time Stories is a kind of a first-person scenario-based exploration game where you're trying to solve a mystery, and there's a time loop element to it. I love Time Stories. It's like playing through a movie whenever you play a game of Time Stories. Love Time Stories. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Just One, which is a game where you're not playing against the game itself, but you're giving one-word clues to a player to help them try to guess that word. So it's a party game, a fully cooperative party game essentially. But I have fun every time I play it. It's so easy to teach, so easy to get to the table. And the other one is Mysterium Park. This is a very recent one, but I am really, really enjoying Mysterium Park. It definitely replaces Mysterium, the original Mysterium, for me because it is so much easier to set up. And it's just such a clever game. Again, it's a game where you're not playing against the game. While I do like the puzzle of that style of cooperative game, I more like the style of cooperative game where you are working together as a group to usually use kind of limited information and limited perspective to solve a problem. And in this case, you're trying to solve a mystery, a murder mystery, based on one player who is giving visual clues to the investigators, and the investigators are trying to solve the mystery. And I've just had a lot of fun with it recently. Even in 2 players, it can work as long as the investigator talks out loud about what they're processing. It is hard to pick a game in this category because I love Time Stories so much, but Time Stories is a scenario-based game, so I usually play it once and then I'm done with that scenario. Whereas Just One has gotten to the table dozens and dozens of times. Mysterium Park I can see getting to the table quite a bit. But I think I have to go with Time Stories here. I love Time Stories so much, and I continue to want to play the new scenarios. So I'm gonna make a call for Time Stories here as my favorite cooperative game right now. My number 8 favorite mechanism are one-way time tracks, or often one-way action selection tracks. This category is awesome and continuing to grow. I think the classic example now is Tokaido, where in Tokaido you are walking along a path in feudal Japan and you can move, not as far forward as you want, because there are some stopping points. But basically on your turn, you were saying, okay, I want to move in this one direction 5 spaces, and I will claim the benefit 5 spaces ahead of me. And in doing so, you are giving up on all those previous spaces that you could have chosen. I think this is a wonderful mechanism. I think it leads to some great player interaction because everyone's sharing this path. You are blocking other players from choosing the thing that you're getting, but you're also opening up all the spaces that you didn't choose for them. It is really satisfying to be able to jump way ahead and grab something that's really important to you before other players. There's a nice tension there. Such a great mechanism. And a few of my favorites in this category are parks, especially at low player counts. I really love parks at 2 or 3. In parks, there's a variable path you can see here where you build the one-way path every round. So it's a little bit different every round. So I love that about parks. And I think I'm going to say my favorite in this category is Glenmore 2 Chronicles, or Glenmore Chronicles 2. This is another one where you are using tiles to create the path throughout the game. And you're acquiring these tiles and also doing a tile engine building, empire building element. A lot of great mechanisms in Glenmore 2. But I love the one-way time track where you can see all the tiles that are ahead of you. And you can jump way ahead. I think you can jump up to like maybe 15 tiles ahead and grab a tile that you really, really want. Or kind of slow play, because as you do that, as you leave tiles for other players, you're giving them more choices. At the same time in Glenmore, the more tiles you have at the end of the game in your tableau, if you have more than any other player, you're going to lose some points. So it balances that aspect really well, where even if you do jump ahead to grab something you want and you leave a lot of tiles for another player, that player isn't necessarily going to go tile by tile and pick them all, because they might lose a bunch of points at the end of the game. And also there's a cost to acquire many of the tiles. And so if they can't afford that cost, they just can't acquire all of them. So it balances that element really well. And so I'm picking Glenmore 2 as my favorite game with a one-way action selection or time track. So that's number 8. My number 7 favorite mechanism is Push Your Luck or Press Your Luck. This is a mechanism that that has really grown on me more recently. And it generally means that you are making a choice in a game where and deciding how risky do I want to get here? How far do I want to go before busting? Or am I satisfied with what I have right now? A few examples of this, I'm looking at my little list here, are Ra. In Ra is a wonderful auction game where you are pushing your luck as to when the round will end. Because when the round ends, it ends instantly based on these tiles that are coming out of a big bag. And if the round ends, you haven't used some of your auction tiles, you lose out on the opportunity to use those auction tiles. In Incan Gold, where's my copy of Incan Gold? Incan Gold is one that I love. This is one that you can play over Zoom. You can play it on Tabletop Arena or Board Game Arena. This is a push your luck game where you are delving deep into a dungeon and dividing up loot as you go with all the players who decide to continue into the dungeon. Or you can run out of the dungeon, because there are certain things that happen while you explore this dungeon that if they happen too often, or if you basically get 2 of the same bad thing, then everyone in the dungeon still die. They die and they lose all the treasure that they were hoping to collect. So you need to decide, how deep am I going to go into this dungeon? And there's a wonderful layer of player interaction there, because you don't really want other players to join you. You kind of want everyone else to run out at the right time and leave you behind, but have you get lucky as you go deeper and deeper and get all the treasure for yourself. Incan Gold is fantastic. Wonderful little, I would say maybe a filler plus. It lasts around 30 minutes. And then Quacks of Quedlinburg. I really do love Quacks in this category. This is a tough one because I really do love these games. Incan Gold, Ra, and Quacks. In Quacks, the thing that I love about the Push Your Luck is that even if you bust, you still get to choose between gaining the points based on where you busted, or based on based on the resource that you can gain to acquire better tokens to put in your bag. It's a bag building game as well. This is hard. I'm gonna go with Quacks here, because it does have that mechanism where if you bust, you don't actually lose everything. I think that adds a wonderful tension to Incan Gold and Ra, but it is a nice little twist in Quacks that you still get something even when you bust. So yeah, I'll choose Quacks as my pick for Push Your Luck or Press Your Luck. That's my number 7 favorite mechanism. My number 6 favorite mechanism, another broad category here, is engine building. I love progression in games. I love when you are better at doing stuff at the end of the game than early in the game based on decisions that you made. So this is something that I like to see in any game. But there are some games that focus a little bit more on engine building than other games. And 2 examples of this are Terra Mystica and Russian Railroads. In Terra Mystica, you are improving your income engine throughout the game based on what you are building on the board and removing from your player mat. In Russian Railroads, you are progressing along these tracks. And I guess it's a slight twist on engine building because the benefits, other than points, aren't really residual benefits, but you are getting better and better and closer to better things as you advance on these tracks. That was definitely an inspiration for Tapestry. But I'm going to go with Terra Mystica here. I love Terra Mystica. I love both these games, but Terra Mystica I think is a better example of an engine building game, and it is one that I love. At the end of the game, you're getting all this income compared to at the beginning of the game where you weren't getting all that much. And there's a nice decision point throughout the game because whenever you build something on the board, you are pulling something else off the board, almost always, except for the settlements. And so you are not just improving your income, but also changing your income. So you might be getting less of one thing, but also more of something that's a little bit more valuable. Love that about Terra Mystica. So that's going to be my pick for my favorite engine building game. And a lot of the Stonemaier games are engine building games. Scythe is an engine building game. Tapestry is engine building. Wingspan is engine building. I love engine building and sense of progression in our games. Number 5 is polyomino games or Tetris style games where you're fitting together polyomino Tetris pieces or using them in other formats. I'll show in a second an example of this. But this is a category that I really, really love because it is so satisfying to have this sense of completion in a game where you have this empty void that you get to fill up in a puzzly way. That to me is always really, really satisfying. I was just playing New York Zoo the other day. I was losing. I knew I wasn't going to win, but it was still really satisfying to try to fill in this space. Some classic examples of this, New York Zoo is very new, are Blokus. Blokus is an abstract version of this, that an older version. This is my old Blokus, still plays really, really well. This is one that I pretty much only want to play at 4 players, though. A much newer example is the Isle of Cats, which is also a drafting game, but I love filling my boat with different cat-shaped polyomino tiles in this game. It is really, really satisfying. In fact, I need to put this in another category, too, that I need to remember for later. Love that about Isle of Cats. And I had one other example. Oh, yeah, Cartographers. Cartographers is one. This was the example where you're not actually using tiles. You are just filling in a map. You're kind of designing this map based on different shapes that you're given on end-of-round goals. Or not you have end-of-round goals, but you're also getting different shape cards throughout the game where you're flipping these cards and you have to draw that shape on your map. All of these games, oh man, this is a really, really tough pick because I really do love all of these games. Isle of Cats, Cartographers, or Blokus. Very different styles of games here. And there's other ones too, like a Feast for Odin. I love Feast for Odin too. I think I'm going to go with the Isle of Cats. Isle of Cats does more than just being a polyomino game because it does have this really interesting draft that you're doing throughout the game. But yeah, I'm going to go with Isle of Cats. I think that will be my pick right now. Yeah, I'm stumbling a little bit because even as I'm talking about these games, I'm remembering other mechanisms that could be on this list that I really, really enjoy. But I'll keep on going with the list that I have right now. My number 4 favorite mechanism is deck building and bag building. Again, I'm going to mention Quacks of Quedlinburg. This is a game that I really love. It comes up a lot. It is also a fantastic bag building game. Other examples of great bag building games are Clank, Shards, and Shards of Infinity, both of which I have here. So here's Shards of Infinity, a smaller box, beautiful tight game. There's a great digital version, also plays really well with 2-player in person. And Megan and I love the cooperative version of this. It has a fantastic cooperative mode. The thing that makes this deck building so special is this element of mastery in the game, where you have this thing that you're leveling up on throughout the game that makes your cards better, and it also gives you a decision point every turn in that, do you want to get more mastery, because every turn you can get one more mastery, or do you want to buy the most expensive card in the card row and not gain that extra mastery. So it's a great decision point that opens up the card row quite a bit. Love this game. Clank is one of my favorite games. I have everything in a giant box here. I'm really excited about the new expansion. This is the Legacy version, also one of my favorite Legacy games. And Clank also combines bag building and deck building, and a board that you're in a dungeon that you're exploring and delving into. I love the dungeon in Clank and the different boards. This is a really tough category too. But I think I'm going to go with Shards of Infinity. This has really climbed up my list this year. I really, really love this game. And I love, even just talking about it, I get excited about that element of mastery and the decision points that it adds to the game. Highly recommend this. I definitely highly recommend the cooperative expansion, which is Shadow of Salvation. So that's going to be my pick for deck building or bag building. My number 3 favorite mechanism is Tug of War. Man, I love this mechanism. Games where you have a tug of war, maybe for control or influence. One example of this is Hanamikoji. In Hanamikoji, you are trying to gain influence over different geisha using cards that you play. And there's a slight tug of war element in terms of the influence is always either in the middle or you have control of the geisha. So it's a very small tug of war track there. A longer example of this is Seven Wonders Duel. The military track in Seven Wonders Duel is a wonderful tug of war back and forth, especially since at the end of either track is an instant win condition for the player who gets to the end of that track. The example I'm going to... this is a tough one, because the other example is Watergate, and I really, really love Watergate. There's a great tug of war mechanism in Watergate where you are not just tugging back and forth on one token on the track, but on the same track there are different tokens that you are kind of managing and trying to get on your side by the end of the round. And it is just a kind of a tug of war. It fully embraces the tug of war mechanism. So while I love Seven Wonders Duel, I love Hanamikoji, because Watergate is centered more around that tug of war mechanism, I'm going to pick it as my favorite for this category. There might be a new contender here too, though, because there is a new Reiner Knizia game coming out called, I always forget the name, it's Royal Duel or something like that. It's a dueling game where you use the same mechanism of a single track with multiple tokens on that track that you were pushing back and forth. That might be a contender for this category, but right now I'm going to pick Watergate as my favorite tug of war game. My number 2 favorite mechanism is I cut, you choose, or I price, you choose. Again, I'll use Hanamikoji as an example here because a few of the different actions that you can take in Hanamikoji are that I take a few cards from my hand and I divide them into, say, 2 piles, and my opponent gets to choose 2 of the piles, or one of the pile, and I get the other pile. I love the interaction of this mechanism because you really have to think about what you want, but you also have to think about what you can tempt the opponent with so that they take the stack that you want them to, and you get the stack that you want. Or you don't give them a choice at all. You just put out 2 stacks of identical cards, either of which are good for you, but maybe less good for them. I love that about Hanamikoji. But I think my favorite game in this category is Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This has been one of my favorite games for a long time now. It is an I price you choose game where one player at any given time is the master builder, and they are going to price all the tiles that are available for players to buy that round. And so you are really actively looking around the table at what other players, how much money they have, what they want in their castle, and so you're trying to determine what you really want. But you are going to be the last player to buy. If you're the master builder, you're the last player to buy. So you're trying to price the thing you want so that it lasts long enough to get back to you, but so that it's not so expensive that you lose all your money when you pay it. And also, actually, Ludwig has a closed economy as well. I forgot about this. This is a category I mentioned earlier, because players are paying you for those tiles that you've priced out. It's an awesome mechanism. I love it in Castles of Mad King Ludwig. And I'm going to pick it, as much as I love Hanamikoji, I'm going to pick Ludwig over Hanamikoji as my favorite I cut, you choose, or I price, you choose game. My number 1 favorite mechanism, this was hard to pick really because I love all these mechanisms so much, but when I hear that a game has this mechanism, as many games have it, it still gets me excited about it because it's such a, I understand this mechanism so well, and I love seeing all the different innovations that that designers are using with this mechanism, and that is worker placement. Classic mechanism now, worker placement. Shem Phillips at Garphill Games is one of the best designers in this realm. He does so many interesting things. I was just playing the Raiders of the North Sea app the other day, and I love this worker placement mechanism where you're putting a worker down and then picking another worker up. The workers are never really yours. You only ever have one worker. He also did some really cool stuff with Architects of the West Kingdom, where you're piling up workers on different action spots and getting better benefits the more they pile up. Just brilliant mechanisms from Shem in this space. But two of my favorite games that maybe are even a little bit higher than those games are Tzolk'in. Did I not get Tzolk'in off my shelf? I did not get it off my shelf. Did I? No, it's still on my shelf. One of my favorite games, Tzolk'in, is still on my shelf. That is a wonderful worker placement game where you're putting workers on these dials that represent how long the workers have been focused on getting a certain resource. And so when you pull the worker off the dial, you get a better benefit if they've been on that dial for a long time. Awesome worker placement game. But I think my pick is actually going to go to Lords of Waterdeep, a now classic worker placement game that I just get excited to play every time I play it. I think part of it's some of the other mechanisms in the game, but the worker placement itself is so distilled down to its core that I really, really enjoy it. I get excited to play it, and I love playing it. And so I'm going to pick Lords of Waterdeep as my favorite worker placement game right now, although there are so many worker placement games that I really, really love. And I've designed a few of them. I've designed Euphoria, Viticulture is worker placement, Charterstone is worker placement. Is that all of them? Pendulum is worker placement. Didn't design that, but that is one that we publish. So this is a mechanism that I really love. I'll probably return to it someday if I can be as innovative as Shem has been with his games, or as the designers of Tzolk'in were with their game. And ironically, I'm picking Lords of Waterdeep is not particularly innovative in the worker placement space, but I really love what they do with it. I think that's okay to have a very streamlined mechanism and build around it with some really awesome other core mechanisms. So yeah, worker placement is my number one favorite mechanism right now. Some of you might ask, Jamey, are you ever going to design a game with all of these mechanisms? I don't know if a game, I thought about that as I was making this list. Is it possible to have a game with all these mechanisms? And some of the games that I mentioned have multiple mechanisms of these, like A Feast for Odin has polyomino tiles. It's also engine building. It's also worker placement. Also push your luck even. So some of my favorite games do have multiple mechanisms, but I don't think a game would work well with all of them in it. It would just be a little bit too much. But I do love games that combine several of these mechanisms into a game that flows really, really well. So yeah, these are my top 12 favorite mechanisms. When I hear a game has some of these mechanisms, I just inherently am curious and excited about it. And I'd love to hear what that is for you. When you hear a game has X, Y, and Z mechanism, what are those mechanisms that just inherently make you really excited? And if you'd also like to share maybe a few of your favorite games within these mechanical categories that I mentioned, I'd love to hear about that in the comments as well. Thanks.